He had seen storms before, but not one like this. The kind that doesn't just fall from the sky, it hums through the bones of the earth, making everything still, as if the world itself is waiting for something holy to happen. Ethan Cole sat inside his patrol truck that night, windshield fogged, headlights cutting short tunnels through sheets of rain. He was a forest ranger by duty, but something closer to a guardian by calling. For years, he had walked these woods, learning their language, the way the pines breathe, the way the creek speaks, the way silence carries meaning. But nothing in his quiet life prepared him for the moment when the forest spoke back. Through the downpour, a shape emerged, a fox, thin, drenched, her fur plastered to her ribs, her eyes glowing with a wild amber light. She wasn't running. She wasn't hiding. She was walking straight toward him. Ethan blinked, unsure if fatigue was playing tricks on him. Then he saw what dangled from her mouth, a tiny bundle of fur no bigger than his hand, a fox kit. The mother stopped at the side of his truck, lifted her paws against the door, and rose until her face met the glass. The rain beaded between them like a curtain of tiny diamonds. For a heartbeat, the world went still. And then she dropped the baby onto the floor mat of his truck, stared for 1 second longer, and vanished into the storm. Ethan froze. He wasn't afraid, he was in awe. The kit whimpered, barely breathing, eyes sealed, body trembling. He reached down, hands shaking, and wrapped the small creature in his jacket. The tiny heartbeat pressed against his palm like a whisper saying, "Do something." And so he did. By morning, the storm had passed, leaving behind a forest washed clean and quiet. Ethan drove straight to Wild Haven, the rescue center where animals found second chances. The staff met him at the door, their faces softening when they saw what he carried. They examined the kit gently, checking temperature, pulse, hydration. Then someone noticed the faint, rubbed mark around its leg, the kind left by rope. Ethan's breath caught. He knew what that meant. This wasn't a random storm rescue. Someone had trapped her. He returned to the site where he'd first seen the fox. The ground was still wet, the air smelled like pine and secrets. He followed the faint impressions of paw prints through the mud, past the fence line, to a clearing he hadn't patrolled in years. There he found what he didn't want to find: a broken snare, a nylon cord still damp from the rain, and the chemical scent of something that didn't belong to nature. He crouched down, tracing the fibers with his fingertips. Whoever had done this hadn't come here by accident. They'd been using these woods. He kept following the trail until it led him to a structure, an old barn he'd passed 100 times but never looked at closely. The lock was broken. The door creaked open. Inside was darkness and something else, the smell of fear. Rows of cages lined the walls, some empty, some moving. Eyes glinted in the dim light, raccoons, owls, a hawk, and in one far corner, a fox with a scar along her hind leg. She was breathing fast but standing. Ethan called for backup, his voice quiet, measured. Within hours, the Wildlife Task Force arrived, boots sinking into the wet grass as they fanned out with flashlights. What they found wasn't just one crime scene, it was a network. Illegal breeding, poaching, and selling wild animals for profit. The kind of thing that hides in the cracks of civilization until someone finally looks close enough to see. The mother fox was rescued that night. The moment she was placed in a padded transport cage, she pressed her face to the metal bars, nose twitching, searching. When the crate holding her kit was brought near, she let out a low sound, half growl, half sob, and lay down as close as she could. They named her Asha, a word that means hope. At Wild Haven, they gave her a quiet room, curtains drawn halfway, soft light, no noise. The vets worked gently, washing the wound on her leg, applying medicine, and speaking in voices low enough not to startle the air. When she rested, her kits lay close against her belly, their small bodies rising and falling with hers. Ethan visited when he could, always from behind the observation glass. He would stand there for minutes at a time, watching her breathe, wondering what it took for something so wild to choose trust over fear. Weeks passed. The rescue center moved in its quiet rhythm, feeding schedules, medical checks, charts on clipboards. The goal wasn't affection, it was survival. They handled the kits with gloves, used long tongs for feeding, never let them learn the shape of human kindness, because love in that place had to wear gloves. Outside, the forest changed. Snow melted into creeks, creeks fed the grass, and the world turned green again. The kits grew fast, stronger, sharper, wilder. Their fur deepened in color, their eyes shifted from baby blue to molten gold. They played, pounced, tumbled through straw and shadow. They learned from their mother, and she taught them everything: how to listen before moving, how to vanish into stillness, how to wait for the moment when the world blinks and strike. Ethan watched from a distance, his reflection faint in the glass, thinking about that night in the rain, the moment her eyes met his through the window. He had seen fear in animals before, but never this. Courage wrapped in desperation, the wild choosing mercy. One afternoon, the director of Wild Haven approached him. "She's ready," she said. Asha and her kits had been moved to the pre-release enclosure, a section of protected land thick with grass and trees, built to help wild creatures remember who they were before they were caged. Ethan helped carry the crates. When they opened the door, Asha didn't bolt. She stepped forward slowly, one paw at a time, nose raised to the wind. Her kits followed, clumsy but brave. She turned once, eyes finding his. There was no fear in them, only knowing. Then she melted into the tall grass, her children in tow. Weeks turned to months. The seasons spun. Trail cameras caught flashes of russet fur moving through the underbrush, a print in the mud. A shadow crossing the creek, signs that the wild was healing. The illegal breeding ring unraveled in courtrooms and ledgers. The barn was seized, condemned, and finally torn down. In its place grew wildflowers, pale yellow and white, bending in the wind. A small sign was put up. This land was once a cage. Now it is a passage. No names, no plaques, just truth. Ethan visited one last time before retirement. The air smelled like cedar and rain. The field where the barn once stood was quiet, except for a single bird singing in the distance. On the wall that hadn't yet fallen, someone years ago had drawn a fox in charcoal, tail too long, ears too round. It would crumble soon, but he didn't mind. Some things are meant to disappear so others can live. Months later, snow returned, white spread across the hills like forgiveness. Cameras along the reserve began to record new images, paws in snow, prints following smaller prints. One morning, a clear clip, a fox with a faint scar along her hind leg, moving gracefully through the frost. Behind her, 5 shapes darted in and out of the frame, grown kits, wild and free. One paused, pawed at a mound of snow, and performed a little pounce like joy made visible. Ethan saw the footage once. He laughed quietly, then deleted it. Not everything sacred belongs to files. Some things should stay whispered between wind and water. Years passed, people forgot the story. The barn, the rain, the rescue all faded into rumor. But the forest never forgets. On certain nights when the rain comes sideways and the thunder murmurs in the hills, the rangers say you can still see the reflection of a fox in the glass of a parked truck, as if checking to see if the man inside remembers. Ethan did remember. Every time the storm returned, he parked in the same clearing, shut off the engine, and let the sound of rain fill the silence. He'd close his eyes and see it again, the moment she rose from the storm, wild eyes steady, her child hanging from her mouth. The moment when the line between man and nature blurred into something pure. He grew older, his hair silvered, his hands roughened, but he never lost that quiet awe for the wild. He answered every call that came, hawks tangled in wire, deer caught in fences, turtles flipped on the wrong side of the road. He did it not for recognition, but because he understood now what mercy really is. Mercy isn't weakness. Mercy is the strength to stop, to kneel, to help without asking anything in return. One evening, long after he had stopped keeping count of the years, the rain came again. He sat in his truck, listening to the drumming on the roof. The windshield blurred into silver, and in the reflection of his side mirror, for a brief and tender second, he thought he saw her, amber eyes, sharp ears, rain clinging to fur. He smiled, knowing it was memory, not miracle, but it was enough. Because somewhere out there, Asha was alive, maybe older, maybe gone, but her story carried by every drop that touched the earth. The world doesn't say goodbye to its miracles, it just folds them into the next chapter. The collar that once tracked her had long since fallen away, buried beneath moss and root. The data files were stored, archived, forgotten, but her legacy lived in quieter places. In the space between thunder and dawn, in the gentle way children now spoke about foxes, not as pests but as neighbors, the forest healed, the people learned. The distance between what is wild and what is human grew smaller, not from conquest but from care. And Ethan, in his last years, found peace in the knowledge that once, just once, something untamed had chosen him. They say the measure of a life isn't how many creatures you save, but how many learn to never need saving again. Asha and her kits vanished into that truth, into the whisper of leaves, into the silence that belongs only to those who have earned it. So if you ever find yourself alone on a rainy night, headlights flickering, road glistening like a river, remember this. There was once a fox who climbed onto a man's truck, carrying the smallest thing she had, and handed it over to the only hope she knew. That act changed everything. It reminded one man, and maybe all of us, that mercy isn't a weakness. It's a bridge, and sometimes the wild crosses it first. And when the storm ends and the world breathes again, maybe that's the point. Maybe that's what the wild has been trying to tell us all along. That trust is the most fragile, most powerful thing on earth, that every act of care sends a ripple you might never see, that somewhere out there, a mother still teaches her children how to survive and how to hope. The wild keeps its mysteries. The rain keeps its rhythm, and life, as it always has, goes on with claws and with gentleness.